How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylai Hobby Time. Some of you may remember this little display box with a single plastic bullet in it. If you remember the video that it comes from, you are a real one and you should let me know in the comments. I found a new spot for the bullet though, because I needed the display box for something else today. The Kickstarter for the Wild Imaginary West RPG is still live and climbing, and one of the things that we're offering are digital downloads of all of the miniatures, including scaled-up versions of the characters specifically for collectors and mini painters. These minis are beautifully detailed, and I love them even more at this large scale, so I'm looking forward to seeing how everybody paints them. Today I'm going to be making a diorama with this guy crouching next to a little campfire, and I'll be giving it to one of you. The details for that will be later in the video. To power this campfire, I'm using a Conwy Castle from Terraintronics and a little flame cob light. The first thing to do was to drill a hole in the base to mount my switch, and exactly opposite of that hole was another hole for the wire. I had to do a little bit of deconstructive and then reconstructive surgery on my wire to get it through the small hole. The next step was to build the small piece of terrain that this guy will be crouching on. I traced out the shape of the base onto a sheet of XPS foam, and I brought over my hot wire table to do the slicing. The foam offcut that I was using didn't have perfectly straight sides, so to get nice clean cuts I used a metal ruler. After shaping the foam into an octagon to match the acrylic base, I put my wire table away and I sanded the edges to an even more flat and clean surface. Once that was done, I broke out my handheld hot wire and I carved a slope into the foam. Landscapes are always more fun when they have a little bit of a slope to them. I made sure to cut a hole so that the wires would run through to the campfire in the right place, and then I broke out some pre-made molded resin rocks to glue to the base. I picked the ones that looked the most interesting to me, and before gluing them in place, I textured the foam with a hobby knife, a wire brush, and then I glued the rocks in place using some foam safe superglue. Foam safe superglue takes longer to set than normal superglue, so an accelerator is usually recommended. That is the thin liquid in this bottle with the tiny beak. When the rocks were on and stuck in place, I textured the foam around them so they'd look more natural where they sat, and then it was time to fill the gaps and add some dirt using Sculptamold. I mixed up a batch that was small, but still way too big for the amount that I needed, and I applied it carefully in and around the rocks using a palette knife. After that had been worked in place, I covered the remaining exposed pink foam with Mod Podge. I didn't add any plaster or paint to the Mod Podge because I just needed the protective layer of Mod Podge to go between the foam and my texture paints. While the terrain paste was still wet, I pressed in some medium-sized rocks and I applied an earth texture citadel paint over the lower section of the base. I then added some smaller pebbles and sand, which I sealed in place with isopropyl alcohol and watered down white glue. Once the base had been stoned and pebbled sufficiently, I broke out some little sticks from a box of sticks, and I made some logs for the campfire. I could have gone outside and harvested some sticks myself, but since I have this box from Woodland Scenics, I might as well use it. After the logs had been glued together, I removed the flame. Because of the silicone, it slipped right out, which is nice. And by this time, the Sculptamold had dried enough to apply a layer of dirt terrain effects, and then I set the base aside to dry fully. While I waited for that to dry, I threw my hobby mat over to its other side, and it was time to prime and paint the miniature. But before I do that, I'd like to bring to your attention the Crafting for Hope fundraiser art challenge. I was recently asked by PKT Crafts to be one of the judges for the art challenge, which I was honored to accept. It's a really great cause, and you should join it if you're able. The link will be in the description. After my hobby mat had been wiped down, I glued the mini to a base, I chucked that in a chuck, and I threw a black primer into my airbrush. And while I paint this hunter, I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons. I absolutely love all of the miniatures that I'm having made for this game, but I'm particularly happy with the way that the characters have all turned out. Hardy Fowler captured the essence of the character descriptions to a T in the original artwork, and our sculptor, Kawe Costa, has brought them to life beautifully in 3D. The human miniatures that come with the box set will all be on 28mm bases, but like I said at the beginning, the high detailed minis scaled for 1/24 scale are available as 3D downloadables as well, perfect for making dioramas or vignettes from the Wild Imaginary West, like the one I'm making today. And as I said earlier, I'm going to be giving this diorama away to one of the viewers of this video. All you have to do to enter that is to be subscribed to this channel, leave a comment on this video, and for some extra entries, you can go follow me and Rune Foundry on Instagram. I will announce the winner in 2 weeks. More details will be in the description. By this time, the base had fully dried and it was time to paint it up as well. I started by priming it black, just like the Hunter, and then I switched to a dark purplish red for the shaded areas, followed by lighter and lighter shades of desert rock color. After multiple layers of different colors of tan, getting lighter and lighter every time, things were looking pretty good, but I wanted some rusty clay dust in all of the cracks. I brushed on some pigment powder, which I mostly brushed off, and then I locked that in place with some isopropyl alcohol. I think the IPA activated some of the lower layers and changed the coloration. It didn't look too bad, but there was a slight sheen that I wasn't happy with, so I took it outside and gave it a coat of matte varnish, which made it glossy, unlike the name would have suggested. So to change that, I dusted on more pigment powder, which helped bring back the matte appearance, and then it was time to put the Hunter in place. I gently drilled a hole in each foot of the miniature, which I filled with a small copper wire. I then anchored him down by pressing the wires into the base and locking it all together with some more foam-safe superglue. With the miniature in place, the last step was to wire the fire. I pulled the wires through the base, through that hole which I had conveniently made earlier, and then I added a bead of solder to the terminals on the cob light. I tested the wires, made sure they were in the correct orientation, and I soldered everything together before protecting the connection points with some heat shrink, and then I pulled it back through the hole into the base. I then glued the foam down to the acrylic mid base and the mid base to the real base, and all of the base gluing was done. I used more accelerator to accelerate the dry time of the glue, and once that had been fully evaporated by use of a hairdryer, I stuck the clear acrylic lid on the top, and after that, I called it good. The Kickstarter for the Wild Imaginary West has 10 days left, and we still have some fun stretch goals we'd like to reach. If you haven't checked it out already, you can find it in the description. And if you'd like to have this Wild Imaginary West Campfire Nightlight diorama on your own desk, the details for that are also in the description. That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.